Module 23 is all about money, what counts as money, the history of different forms of money, and the functions of money in our economy. We'll also talk about who controls the money supply and the different aggregates of money that they measure. Money and wealth are often confused. Wealth is the broader category, and it includes money as well as cash. So, first of all, let's explain the difference between money and cash. Money is any asset that you can easily exchange for goods and services. So, money is a very liquid type of wealth. Remember, liquidity is your ease of converting something into cash. But money is not just cash. It also includes things like checking accounts, savings accounts, traveler's checks, and different types of accounts in your bank, like certificates of deposit, money market accounts. So there's lots of things that are part of money that we'll learn about this module that aren't just cash. Cash includes currency in circulation. We're talking about your dollar bills, and we're talking about change or coinage. That's cash. Money is more broad. And wealth is the broadest because it also includes possessions like homes, real estate, businesses, stocks. You can own lots of things that are part of your wealth, but they're not money because not all of those assets are very liquid. Money includes cash and other assets that are highly liquid. So cash is the most liquid thing because liquidity is how easily you can convert something to cash. Cash already is cash. So we're talking about currency in circulation. This is cash held by the public. Currency are the bills and the coins that you have in your wallet. But there's also currency that's held in banks and in the Federal Reserve. So currency in circulation is the money that's out circulating with households. Money also includes checkable bank deposits. So you probably would call this your checking account, but the formal economic term is a checkable bank deposit. There's a difference between your checking account and your savings account. First of all, checking accounts are more liquid because you spend checks like they're cash. At a lot of stores, you use the check like cash, so it's very easy to convert. Also, many savings accounts have more restrictions than checking accounts, and they might limit the amount of withdrawals you can make in a month. So while you have money in that savings account, it can sometimes be hard to get that money into cash if you have limited withdrawals. Whereas checking accounts, you're using the checks as cash right now. There are three roles or functions of money. Different things have been used as money throughout different times in history and throughout different cultures, but they have to do all three of these functions in order to count. The first role of money is it needs to be a medium of exchange. That means that you can take that money and exchange it for a good or service. So it has to be widely accepted. If I decided that I wanted pencils to be money and I tried to trade those pencils with you all of the time, you wouldn't accept it. A lot of people wouldn't accept it. It wouldn't be a very good medium of exchange. So it has to be widely accepted. The second function is that the money needs to store its value. People used to barter and they would trade goods for other goods, but some goods don't last very long. If our currency, we only bartered cheese, that cheese might have a high value now, but if I tried to stockpile it, it would start to go down in value as the cheese started to go bad. But if I found a $20 bill in my coat pocket from last winter, it has pretty much the same value or purchasing power as it did before. So our dollar bills have very good store of value. And finally, money is a unit of account. This means that you can compare prices because they're all in the same general sense of currency. You also can compare one currency to another. When people used to barter, if something was worth two chickens or a quarter of a cow, it would be very hard to actually make choices about is this a good price or not because you're using different units to compare each good. But if this thing is $5 and then that thing is $7, We have a very standardized system of accounting, and it makes it much easier to price compare and to determine if this is a good value or not. The first role or function of money that we're going to go into more depth is the medium of exchange. This is the idea that money needs to be an asset that individuals acquire in order to trade for goods and services, not for their own consumption. So, dollar bills are not very functional in terms of keeping you warm, putting clothes on your back. They don't do any of these things for your own personal consumption, but they're very helpful for trading for goods and services. Now, we're going to compare money to bartering because money was a replacement for this barter system. So, back when goods and services had to be bartered or traded, both sides of the transaction had to want what the other one was offering. This is called a double coincidence of wants. So, say for example, I needed to go to a dentist, so I needed this service from the dentist, and all I had to offer was chickens. If this dentist is a vegetarian, then he wouldn't want my chickens very much, and I would have to find a third party that wanted my chickens and had something to offer that the dentist would accept. So you can see how bartering can be very inefficient, because if both sides didn't have something that the other side wanted, then the deal wouldn't go through, and you'd have to continue to search until everyone's needs were met. So, money solves this problem because you can exchange it without the money producing anything. Everyone wants money, everyone accepts money because money is it's transferable into other things. Whatever it is that the dentist truly wanted, he or she could buy it with the money that I provided. I don't have to figure out what they want. All I have to do is give them money. So money is invented as an alternative to bartering, and it makes economies much more efficient because you don't have as many of those individual transactions trying to figure out what the other person wants and figuring out how do we meet this double coincidence of wants. Instead, everyone accepts money as a medium of exchange. The second role of money is that it's a good store of value. It needs to hold its purchasing power over time. Remember, we talked about this term purchasing power with inflation, and that's the idea of how much your money buys. As long as prices are not rapidly changing, money stores its value well. You can put the money under your mattress or in your checking account, and it will still be useful with pretty much the same value as time goes on. If we have 2% inflation rate, it changes your purchasing power 2%, but the money itself has held its value over time. In barter system, a lot of goods wouldn't hold their value, especially if they were perishable goods. So if you were a farmer and you produced something that wouldn't still have the same value in a year, it was very difficult to acquire wealth because you couldn't really stockpile that thing because it wouldn't have the same value. You'd have to transfer it into something else that would hold their value. So money takes care of that by being something that doesn't go bad, and as long as inflation is not rampant, it holds its value over time. Money is a good unit of account because it helps you standardize prices and values. When you're trying to compare two different goods, if they each were priced in a different currency, or if they each were priced in the comparable goods you could barter them for, it'd be very difficult to actually compare those two products. Currencies are supposed to show the relative worth of goods and services in that economy. But in a barter system, you would just get what they're worth in terms of another good. So if 1 pound of cheese is equal to a dozen eggs, a half pound of sausage, 3 gallons of milk, those are all different amounts of different products. So in terms of budgeting, it'd be very confusing. It also would be hard to make contracts when you don't have a good solid sense of what something is worth now, what it's worth in the future. So money clears that up and makes it much easier to compare and make contracts that help us with accounting in the future. The next section is about the three major types of money. Throughout human history, different civilizations have realized the important role that money plays, but they've used different things to function as their money. So, the first category of a type of money is commodity money. Commodities are things that have intrinsic value. That means value within themselves. So, they have separate uses beyond just currency that gives them their value. So in this case, you can see shells and gold coins that were stamped. We'll see some other examples on the next slide, but these have value in themselves. The next category is called commodity backed. So this certificate in the bottom right is an old piece of currency in America. It says $50. This bill entitles the bearer to receive 50 Spanish mill dollars or the value thereof in gold or silver according to resolution passed by Congress, 1778. So the idea is that this is a piece of paper for an asset, but is backed by gold or silver. If you wanted to take that to the bank, they would give you the equivalent amount of gold or silver for that piece of paper. That's why it's called commodity backed. It's not made by gold or silver, but you can transfer it in to those commodities. And then the last type is called a fiat currency. That money is valuable because we say it is, and we'll kind of get into what that means a little bit more later. But this dollar bill in the corner is issued by Somerset Worcester Savings Bank. It used to be, before we had a national system of banks in America and nationally printed currencies, that individual banks would issue their currency. And so if you had heard bad things about that bank, if it didn't have a very good reputation, then people would actually not accept dollars from some banks and they would prefer dollars from other banks. So we'll talk a little bit later about how the standardization of the banks helps to make our currency even more widely accepted. But you can see how this is not a commodity, and it also doesn't say anywhere on it that you can transfer it into a commodity. So it's fiat currency. Commodity money is something used as money that has intrinsic value in other uses. Intrinsic value is value that comes from within. So the difference is that the current dollar bills have value because something exterior, like the Federal Reserve, the government, says that it has value. Commodities have value within themselves. So gold, silver have value for other uses. You can use them for jewelry, you can use them as metal. There's other things that were used as commodity monies like grain and maize or corn. So they have value as a food source or as a currency. And tobacco had value because it could be traded as money, but it also could be smoked and used in that way. So commodities have additional values. They can be used more than just as a medium of exchange to purchase goods and services. Commodity-backed money is something that's called representative money. And it's the idea that we're switching from commodities, which were physical items that had intrinsic value, to pieces of paper that you could trade for that commodity. Commodity-backed, so backed up by the gold. We used to have something in America called the gold standard, where our early dollars were tied to a commodity. And banks had gold in reserves. The government had to keep large amounts of gold stockpiled. And for every dollar that they printed, they needed to have the equivalent amount of gold to back it up. And you could take that piece of paper to any bank and exchange it for gold or occasionally silver if that's what they had available. But the idea was, even though the money itself wasn't a commodity, there was a commodity that backed it up and you could switch it out whenever you felt like that's what you preferred. At the time, commodity backed money was an improvement over commodity money. A few reasons why. Banks didn't actually need to have as much gold and silver on hand. Sure, some customers could come in and ask to convert the piece of paper into gold or silver, but most of them wouldn't. So banks didn't need to have as much in their vaults. They also didn't need to have as much secured in that way. Banks also now could loan out the rest of the gold and silver. So this allows our economy to expand because instead of everyone using commodities to purchase things, they're using commodity-backed currencies, freeing banks up to loan out those reserves of gold and silver. So this is going to let us begin to create new money. You'll learn in a later module how loans create money, but it allows money that's being stored in the bank to be used in a second way for loans, not just sitting there waiting. So we have some practice questions. Is a US dollar bill commodity money? No. US dollar bills have no intrinsic value unto yourselves. We don't use them for eating. We don't use them for jewelry. You could take that dollar bill and fold it into origami, and that's about it. It does not have intrinsic value to itself. If you take a dollar bill to a local bank, will they give you the equivalent amount of gold for this money? Also, no. We no longer have the gold standard. So our current dollar bills are not tied to any metal whatsoever. And if you ask them for gold or silver, they're no longer required to give it to you. Now, finally, is a dollar bill money? Yes, it still is. It's the third type we're going to learn about, fiat money. The last type of money is fiat money. Fiat money derives its value entirely from the fact that it is the official currency of a land. So in America, our dollars are fiat money. They are our money because the government has decreed them to be our money, and we back them up with our promise that they are worth something. So this is kind of a hard thing for people to conceptualize, the fact that our money is only worth something because we say it is. But that's exactly what it means. Our currency and most global currencies at this point are now fiat currencies. Everyone accepts them as payment, so it serves all the purposes of money. It stores value as a unit of account. The fiat money in America can also be called Federal Reserve notes because they're issued by the Federal Reserve, and they're the ones that maintain the value. The Federal Reserve plays with the amount of money supplied in the economy in order to make sure that the purchasing power of each individual dollar bill stays as stable as possible. So here we have some pros and cons of fiat currencies. One advantage is that it takes up no real resources. So we actually still do have some gold in Fort Knox, where we used to keep a lot of the money when we had the gold standard, but we don't have to anymore. So as gold values fluctuate, our currency is no longer tied to it. So we don't have to stockpile these metals. We can use them for other things. Also, the money supply can be managed, it can be manipulated by the Federal Reserve based on the needs of the economy. So you've learned about the business cycle, and when we're trying to encourage spending in recessionary times, we normally increase the money supply. And when we're trying to decrease overall spending, if we're going through high inflation, the Federal Reserve actually takes money out of circulation. So these tools that we use in monetary policy to stabilize the economy, we couldn't do if we had the gold standard. The downsides of fiat money are the fact that it can be counterfeit. If it's not an actual physical gold bar, and if it's not easily transferred into commodities either, the risks of counterfeiting go up. We try to combat this by adding new features to our bills each year to try to make them harder to counterfeit, but it still is a legitimate problem. And the other risk of fiat money is that printing too much of it leads to inflation. So if you have an economy that is not necessarily concerned about price stability, if money is printed by a corrupt government agency, then absolutely that fiat money could lose value if too much of it is printed. Another reason that most global economies have gotten rid of the gold standard and have moved on to fiat money is that they not only want the ability to control the money supply and to regulate their own economies, but they also want their economies to be able to grow. And as you see at the bottom here, the yellow section is the dollar value of world major official gold reserves. So the amount of gold in the world is fairly stagnant. We're not finding huge amounts of gold reserves. It's staying fairly stable. But our economies are growing. If you want to be able to increase your GDP and to grow your economy, you need to be able to have more currency to keep up with that. And if we were still tied to the gold standard, it actually would drastically shrink our economy because we wouldn't have the levels of growth that we can keep up with a fiat currency. Later on this unit, you're going to learn the money market or liquidity preference model. This is the new supply and demand model that deals with the supply and demand of money. Money supply is the total quantity of money in the economy at any given time. So the Federal Reserve is the central bank of America, and they're in charge of the money supply here. So not only do they print money, but they also want to figure out how much money is circulating and where. Is it in people's wallets? Is it in savings accounts? Is it in investments? Where is this money held? How much of it is actually circulating? Do we need to print more? So there's a difference between how much money you printed and how much money is still circulating right now. So they're going to break this down into two different monetary aggregates. So we're going to look at the economy overall and break it down into M1 and M2. M1 and M2 are both money, but we're looking at them in terms of which ones are currently being traded right now. So M1 are things that are current mediums of exchange. So this is, of course, cash. But if you can think of other things that we use like cash or spend as cash, those things are all going to be included in M1. We'll get examples on the next slide. M2 are the types of money that are functioning as a store of value. So sometimes money is sitting in certain types of accounts where it's earning interest. So you're not using this money to spend. You're earning this money to store value and earn interest. And if you'd like to convert it into cash later and spend it, you certainly can, but you're currently letting it sit in an account. We said that M1 are the types of money that are being used as a medium of exchange. So they're the most liquid type of money because we're using them as cash currently. So M1 includes three major categories. First of all, it includes the coins and currency in circulation. Your dollar bills, your quarters, those things in your wallet are clearly M1. They're liquid. You're using them as cash right now. But your checking accounts is the same way. If you have a debit card through your bank, you can use that as cash right now. You swipe it, you're using it as a medium of exchange. So even though it might not be a dollar bill, it's functioning just like one. If you write a physical check, same idea. This is accepted as cash. It pays for goods right now. The third category is something that you might not be familiar with. It's called a traveler's check. So this used to be very prevalent when you would go to a foreign country. If you were afraid of being robbed, you could go to the bank ahead of time, tell them you're going on a trip, and you need this amount of money in traveler's checks. They would issue you checks that had unique serial numbers for you. So if you got mugged in a foreign country and you knew the serial numbers on those checks, they'd refund them to you. So that was a way that tourists felt much safer spending money. I went to Italy in the year 2000 and I brought my traveler's checks with me. Nowadays, we can usually use credit cards overseas, but just be aware that if you use a credit card in a foreign country, often you will pay additional fees for conversions. of the currency and just for using something abroad. So traveler's checks still exist, and you can still go to the bank and get them if you don't want to pay those international fees. So anyway, so we have checks, traveler's checks, and currencies that you're using. All of this M1 money is circulating right now. It's being spent right now. So if the Federal Reserve is concerned with increasing spending, you want people to go out and shop because we're in a recession, they want to look at this M1 measure of the money supply and make sure it's big enough. So M2 is the broader monetary aggregate. M1 are the most liquid forms of money. M2 includes M1, and we add on something called near monies. These are financial assets that are not currently being spent like cash. They're sitting in accounts, and they are earning interest in those accounts. If you would like to convert those near monies into cash, you certainly can. So they are liquid, but they're not being spent like cash right now. And that's why the Federal Reserve is more concerned with M1, because they want to see what money is circulating now, what's being spent now. So the full equation for M2 is M1 plus savings accounts plus short-term CDs plus money market accounts. So let's talk about each one. The first is that it's very important to realize that savings accounts and checking accounts are not the same in terms of how they function with spending. You might think of them as the same as kind of a early banker, but how this works is that your checking account is being spent like cash now. There don't tend to be limits on how many purchases you can make with your checking account a month, but savings accounts are different. Usually they earn interest, and the bank is paying you interest because they want to use the money that you have in your savings account in order to give loans to people. And so if they're using your money for something, you can't constantly be taking it out. For that reason, banks tend to have withdrawal limits on savings accounts. And each bank will have different terms, but you can't just take money out of savings whenever you want. It can be converted to cash, but it's a little bit more difficult and you can't do it as often. The next category are something called short-term CDs. A CD is a certificate of deposit. You buy a CD from a bank or a financial institution, and there's a set interest rate and a set term length. So let's say you buy a 6-month CD for $100 and you're going to earn 3% interest. That means that you can't touch your money for 6 months because that's the term that you agreed to. And at the end of that time, you will receive your money back plus the interest that you agreed to. CDs are very much like bonds. Remember how bonds are guaranteed and you get the interest back, but they're much shorter term than a bond. Bonds are often in years, and short-term CDs could be 60 days, 30 days. The longer the time they have your money, the higher the interest rate you get paid. But you can see how from the Fed's point of view, a CD is a near money because you have to wait until the time is up to convert it to cash. And the last type of near money is a money market account. These are a little bit unusual because they are a combination of savings accounts and checking accounts. Normally, money markets require a fairly high minimum deposit. So you have to have maybe $5,000, $10,000. The bank would set their requirement, but a lot of money to start this account. And then the account will pay high interest. So because you're earning interest on this money, it falls within M2, it's a near money. But because you're allowed to write checks from this account, that's kind of like a checking account. But they limit the amount you can write, which makes it more like a savings account. So you can see how it can be used like cash, but only in a limited way, and they're paying interest on it. Therefore, it is a near money. So we've talked about all of the information on the types of currencies, the roles of money, and M1 and M2. Go ahead and do the practice problems, and then we'll go over the correct answers. Hopefully you already tried these questions yourself. Let's check the answers. You were supposed to sort all of these into the type of money: commodity, commodity backed, or fiat. The first question: salt used in Africa in the Middle Ages. That one is commodity money because it had a use beyond just currency. We use the salt for cooking and preservation. Number two, paper currency used in Sichuan, China in the 11th century that was redeemable for silver. That one is commodity-backed money because it wasn't silver, but you could easily transfer it into silver if you chose. Third, gold coins used in the area that is now Turkey around 550 BCE. Commodity money, gold by itself, does have intrinsic value. Number four, United States Federal Reserve notes. That one is fiat currency. It has value because we say it does. And number five, wampum shells used in the early American colonies. These are commodity money. These shells were used for decoration and they were easily stored. They could keep their value well, and they were some of the early commodity monies. There were also many tribes on the coast of Africa that use shells as currency also.